Welcome, everyone, to the Brand Fortress HQ podcast. I'm your host, John Stojan. I have my co-founder here today, Mike Kaufman, and our guest today is John Lee, the co-founder of PickFu. And PickFu is a consumer research platform for getting instant feedback from target audiences, working with thousands of global brands that rely on PickFu to help make better data-driven decisions about their products and marketing. And I think it just has such a massive impact on the Amazon community and helping them really improve products and listings and a lot of other areas. So, John, I'm happy to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, John and Mike. Super excited to be here.
So, for the folks that maybe aren't familiar with you and kind of your journey, what did it look like for you getting involved in, PickFu and kind of the Amazon world?
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, PickFu is a way for you to get feedback from your target audience. We have a panel of 10 million consumers in the US, 15 million worldwide that you can tap into to get direct feedback on your business, listings, business, anything related to your business. So the backstory is that we actually started PickFu as a tool for ourselves when we were running a different business. So my co-founder Justin and I, we've been building web businesses for over a dozen years. We were working on some other main business at the time. It was the two of us, and our background is both product and engineering. And you can imagine two nerds with no design sense, trying to agonize over like a design decision here, like a logo, a website, some kind of headline over here. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Like we would just keep butting heads, and neither of us were experts in this thing. So we would ask our friends and family, and friends and family love you. They're biased. They can kind of get sick of you asking for feedback on your business and everything. So instead, we built a tool to get unbiased feedback on the stuff that mattered to us, right? And that was PickFu. Put it aside for a while. It just kind of grew organically in a couple of different verticals. And every once in a while, we'd look back on it and we'd be like, oh, look, it looks like it's growing. And then we focus on our main business. And at some point after enough of that, we realize, okay, well, the main business is not as interesting. PickFu is the thing that's really taken off, helping other entrepreneurs, which is really near and dear to our hearts. And around that time, that's when we entered the Amazon world, where it turns out that running the proper handful of PickFu tests can really make a big difference in terms of both Amazon traffic and sales and so on.
Very nice. Well, I want to take a little bit of a different direction here. So I think, for folks that look at PickFu on your website or have heard of you before are probably really familiar with, kind of the listing side of things of like, how do I choose, this image over that image? Based on kind of the notes I have here, what I wanted to do was just hear your feedback on one of the things that you mentioned here was validating branding for, and brand value specifically, because brand is one of the things that, is a big part of what we're involved in Brand Fortress HQ. And really where we see Amazon going is that, the days where you could just source up something off of Alibaba, put it up on Amazon and essentially flip that product are essentially dead at this point. And really who's going to win, over the next, 5 to 10 years are going to be those people that build a very powerful and cohesive brand that communicates effectively to customers. So I'm really curious as to, how PickFu can essentially help with that.
Yeah. So, I think you should just think of PickFu as a digital focus group. So anything that you would ask like a in-person focus group, the same kind of focus groups that like CPGs, like Kellogg's uses to figure out their next flavor of Cheerios or something, right? Like you can think of using PickFu as getting feedback from your target audience. So if you're building a brand on Amazon, like you mentioned, you have a brand story, you have a cohesive brand story and sort of like a set of emotions and feelings that you're trying to convey to the potential customer. And if you have this brand story, you want to make sure that all your assets are aligned and conveying that brand story the way that you're hoping that it would. And so when you're setting up your brand, your logo, all your collateral, you want to be able to put that up and test that beforehand, that it is actually conveying, like if you're trying to, let's say, for example, you're trying to build a brand that, like let's say a nutritional supplement brand that conveys strength and reliability and so on. You can take your name, your potential logos, all your logo designs, all your collateral, put that up on PickFu, and actually ask the audience to, let's say, take a look at your logo, or take a look at your logo and write down the first three things that they think about when they see your logo, or take a look at this piece of collateral and think about and convey what kind of feelings, or what kind of feelings or attributes those that collateral is conveying to them as they're doing this thing. If that's because you want to make sure that the what you're putting out in the world is conveying what you're trying to achieve.
So walk me through that a little bit. With a tool like PickFu, what sort of questions, or do you have some recommendations on? Because I think most people that are listening to this probably already have, they've got some traction on Amazon, and they're like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got at least the beginnings of a brand, or I think I've got a brand. What does that operationally look like if they're like, I've had this logo for the last 2 years, and this is kind of what we started out with, but I don't know how well that really, I'm guessing, kind of like back to you and your, you and your partner, where you guys are having an argument over, is this speaking the right message or is it not? And rather than guessing, what does that process look like for them to really validate if their branding is hitting home or if it's not?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a structural perspective, if you're already selling on Amazon, what I would suggest is that you actually take your logo and some of your top, maybe either your top product or your top logo or header image, and actually go over to PickFu, toss it in as a single, what we call an open-ended poll. And basically, you can ask your target audience, please review this image and write down the qualities that you believe this brand conveys. And you can target anywhere between 15 to 500 people. I recommend somewhere between 30 to 50. And you can micro target down to obviously like your target audience, and go through and take a look at the results and see how those results compare to what your hope is that your brand is conveying. Go
How
ahead.
does PickFu? So let's say I run that test, right?
Yeah.
For our audience, how is that information aggregated? So in other words, like depending on how many people I polled, it could be a fair amount of information that I'm sifting through in terms of trying to figure out what did people think.
Mm-hmm.
How does PickFu aggregate that and display that to me in a way that's meaningful? Like, is there any AI analysis? Is it, charts and graphs? Is it just, this is the text and I have to read, 500 messages and try to pull out from it, what I think? How does that work?
Great question. So with PickFu, like as you mentioned earlier, you can do comparative tests on PickFu, right? You can put up to 8 different options, and then the audience will vote on what they prefer and write down why they chose how they chose. With an open-ended question, they just answer the question, or maybe they provide a star rating, or they do a click test. We offer that as well. But one core thing about PickFu is that we always ask every panelist why to answer the question and provide a written response. Now, Mike, as you said, if you get 500 people to write a written response and we set the quality bar super high, that can be a lot of text to read. So obviously you're going to get a list of all the different responses, but we do use AI to analyze all of those responses and provide you a 3-paragraph executive summary on every single poll. So if you're comparing 4 different potential main image variations for your listing, you will get an executive summary of how the audience felt about across those 4 variations. If you're running a poll comparing your main image to your competitors' top images, you'll get that executive summary too. And if you are doing a single image asking about your branding, that AI summary will summarize everything from those 15 to 500 people in a nice executive summary. On top of that, we do demographic breakdowns of all the panelists. So if you have 100 people, we will tell you, for every single person, we can give you the demographic breakdown of gender, age, income, so on, and give you an overall breakdown of across these 100 people, how many males versus females preferred A or B or C or D, income breakdowns and so on. So that can be really useful if you are trying to figure out a target market for your product, right? If you are potentially putting a new product out there and you want to understand what types of demographics might respond to that better than others, you could run a pretty broad poll and actually dive into the demographic reports and understand, oh, well, for this option, actually like higher earning females of a certain, of a certain demographic might prefer this over this, and so on.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of it I wouldn't have thought of it as a platform for researching who your target demographic might be for a specific product. Like, I've always looked at PickFu as really being that thing, like that you're doing that testing after the fact, for listing testing and things of that nature. I like the idea of potentially using it more on the front end, and validating your branding, validating whether you're actually correct about who your target audience is. I think that's a good use case.
When you provided a great example of logo, are there any other kind of high level areas of when somebody's, again, if they've got some traction, but they're like, hey, I want to validate that my brand is really hitting home, or I think that my brand could be more cohesive. What, are there other aspects of that brand that they can test out, or that you'd recommend they test on PickFu?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to hear from your end, like, what are some of the brand problems that you see? And maybe I can try to figure out where PickFu might be helpful on that.
Well, one of the things, is that we do a lot of what we're doing at Brand Fortress HQ is, working on that kind of, branding and post-purchase process to create that engagement with customers, right? And so, one of the things that comes to mind is, product packaging and or inserts or hang tags or things like that, and, instead of waiting, for the results to come back from, say, a split test of an insert that you put in, maybe doing some PickFu testing on those inserts ahead of time in terms of what that messaging might look like. Seems like maybe a good use case. We haven't tried it ourselves, but.
Oh yeah, we absolutely see a lot of insert testing on PickFu, and so not just from the perspective of a design sense, but it's also really helpful to PickFu is really useful for highlighting areas of confusion and questions that you might be missing, or that your customer might have that you might have overlooked, right? So particularly in the area of inserts, obviously you can run a poll on PickFu and get feedback on sort of if you have 2 or 3 different variations of inserts, or even on one insert, like how what the audience perception is of that. But if you are very direct and actually ask, like, please review this insert, what are the questions that you have after reviewing this, or is there any missing information from your perspective, that can uncover a whole set of information that improvements to the information that you're putting on that insert that can save you a lot of time and money, and particularly a lot of headache afterwards, right?
Yeah, it seems like you could also potentially, if you pretty well squared away what your target audience is, like if you really feel like you've got that nailed pretty well, it seems like you could even use that just simply as a more generic test of the offer itself, like
yes,
just, 2 different offers, like which one of these would you respond to, and you just, it's very generic. The design, there's not really much design to it. It's just, this is the offer, which one would you prefer?
We have large sweepstakes companies who use PickFu to test exactly those kinds of offers, because like you said, Mike, that they have figured out exactly who their target audience is, and they are trying to run these weekly promotions, and they will use PickFu to test the promotions, and not only the promotions, but then also how you phrase the promotions, right? Like that matters a ton. So
yeah, it could take, I could see a situation where you could take, 3 or 4 iterations of that test. The front end is, okay, what is the offer? Then the next stage is, okay, we figured out what the offer is. How do we phrase the offer? Now we know how to phrase the offer. Now we need to figure out how we want to lay out the actual formatting of the insert to get the best response rate, X, Y, Z. So, I could see how you could iterate through that process fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you'd have a ton of benefits from layering those on top of each other in order to kind of solve each one of those problems individually. this might be a little bit tactical, but I'm curious. So are there set questions when you're setting up a poll, or is it, is there an art to kind of asking that right question in order to get the data you want out of a test?
Yes and yes. At its core, we want it to be as flexible as possible. So anyone can go onto PickFu. It's self-service, and you can write any question you want, upload up to 8 options, text, images, audio, video, and choose your target audience. And then you're off to the races. But John, as you said, there is an art to asking the right questions. I will promise you that if you try to stuff questions into a single question box, like, you're not going to get great results. What we have done is, over the years, with like all the thousands and whatever of polls that we've seen, we have coalesced templates for specific use cases, like Amazon product, like an Amazon main image optimization, competitive tests, quality control on stuff. And we've made really simple, easy to use templates where you can where the question is pre-filled, the options are set up in a proper way, the audience is pre-targeted, so you can just drop in your options and you're off to the races. So we have pre-built templates for all of our most common use cases, and actually those are discounted off the market price, but you can always just write any question you want, because we want to provide that flexibility for all of our users.
Okay. Very nice. Because I imagine listeners that are, listening to this are like, okay, well, that sounds like amazing things to test. And then, once you make sure that they get the most out of it when they get into the nuts and bolts. So that's fantastic. So one of the other things that I've got here from in my notes is, because I think that this is probably one of the most painful things for sellers is, they've got some traction, they've got a hero product, and, they're looking at, they understand that they need to be launching at least a couple of new products a year in order to continue to grow. And, no matter how much time and effort you put into a product, and hopefully, as we discussed earlier, do some of that research on the front end. But unfortunately, sometimes when we launch a product, it doesn't go the way we want. And we have that, a launch that fails. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about this, case study, and how you guys use what you do at PickFu in order to essentially rescue a failed launch.
Yeah. So first of all, to clarify, we don't do anything because it's all self-service. Like, please don't put me on a listing, right? Like, but I mean, all credit to our users who figure out these amazing ways of using, being able to tap into the consumer insights. So the story you're referring to is, it's this agency called Leap Stores, and what they were doing is that they were helping out this client who was, who had already tried to launch twice. In a very competitive category. And it was this product that he was selling. He launched once, got no traction on his set of target keywords. Went back, changed up a couple things, launched again, also zero traction on any of the sort of the keywords that they were looking at. And then Leap Stores was, he started working with Leap Stores. They came over and they started using PickFu. And what they did is that they kept the product exactly the same, but the hypothesis is that the main image wasn't strong enough to be competitive in that category. So what they did was they went and they took the best sellers in that target category for those target keywords. And they took, I think it was the 3 best sellers, and they ran a PickFu poll for the, just with those 3. So removing his own product, just the 3 best-selling main images, and they ran a PickFu poll on that. And he didn't care which one won. What he cared about was reading the comments, right? So like, they're all there. They're all top sellers for a reason, and those images appeal to shoppers for some kind of reason. And so they went through and read all the comments, coalesced all the positive attributes of what consumers liked about option A, option B, option C, and then started reverse engineering a hybrid image based on that feedback and around those 3 images. And so he actually went through, and he made one pass, ran a PickFu poll, failed, took the feedback, tweaked the image, went back again, tweak the image, ran another poll, failed again. I think he went through maybe six to eight different polls and different iterations of this image until he got an image that was consistently not necessarily beating all the bestsellers, but held its ground, And so with that, like, right, because you're not going to win every single time, but the fact that you are at least standing your ground from a visual perspective on the search results is going to matter a lot. So then he took that image, and that was the only thing that he changed on that launch. Relaunched, and within a week, he had top rankings for a lot of the keywords that he was going for. And there was literally nothing else that had changed, right? Same product, same price point, all of that stuff. And so that kind of just goes to show the power of putting your best, like visually putting your best foot forward when you're doing a launch, and how that can completely change the trajectory of like how your product's going to do.
I think, one of the things that I think is also valuable in that is really kind of a larger, more generic recommendation. And that is to, like, every entrepreneur should understand this, but a lot of people who are selling on Amazon are new entrepreneurs. And I don't think they necessarily do understand this. And that is, failure is pretty much inevitable, but it doesn't have to be the end of that story, right? Like, I mean, he failed twice with his launch, didn't give up on it, said, hey,
Yep.
I think I can still do this, right? And then proceeded to fail numerous additional times in his testing process before he came out with something that was like, okay, yeah, this works, right? And so I think, it's interesting, a lot of people run their split tests and whatnot, and they give up way too soon, right?
Totally.
Like, they run these tests and they're like, oh, it wasn't any better, so I guess I'll just leave it, or, whatever the end result is, depending on what the test is, right? I mean, test it 3, 4, 5, 10 times. Like, I mean, there is a way, most likely, to improve on whatever it is that you have. Like, there is almost certainly a way to improve on it. But if you only test it once or twice or 3 times, chances are you're not going to find it, But if you're willing to, test it 5, 6, 10 times, you're probably going to find something that's better. So,
yeah.
Well, Mike, in my experience, I'd even go farther than that. And, brands that have come to me and said, hey, this product, we just can't figure out this product. A lot of it is because their first solution isn't even to test new main images or to test different aspects of the listing. It's to crank up the ads and hope that it gets better.
right.
And when we're thinking
Our
about
CTR sucks, our CVR
Yes.
sucks. Let's spend more money on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because they don't know what else to do. So I think this is just
Right.
such a good example of, okay, ads can definitely be a hammer, but they're one tool in your toolbox. And you need to have more tools because it's not going to solve every problem for you. And this is a great example of, sometimes you need something different in order to get where you want to go, because ads, yes, they will get you visibility, but if your product isn't earning its place there when it comes to that main image and the other aspects of that listing, you're not doing yourself any favors in the long run, and you're much better off taking some of that money that you would have spent on ads on doing that iterating. And I'm sure that in this example that you provided, John, I'm sure they were frustrated after the first round, the second round, the third round, the fourth round, the fifth round, the sixth round. You know what I mean? Like, everybody hopes that, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to find that solution. And it does take some effort. But if you compare that to, I'm just going to crank up ads and hope for the best, this has such a better outcome to it and gives you so much more value on how you can improve and gives you a lot more tools to work with.
Well, you need a sharp nail, right? Like, I mean, it's like you say, like, okay, that's great. I've got a hammer, but I have a nail that has no sharp point on it. Like, I mean, you can pound on that an awful long time before you get any penetration. If you sharpen the nail, one swipe at that nail and you can get super huge penetration. So, I mean, I think that's the thing, you sharpen the nail, stop hitting it with the hammer.
Yeah. I mean, if it's like you guys have no idea how many times I've talked to PPC agencies who are like, I can't do anything with this listing because the client will not change the image and they just want to keep, turning the crank on turning up spend. And it's like, if you have a leaky bucket, the solution is not to pour more water into it, right? It's to fix your
Right.
bucket first. Then you can pour water into it. And I
Yeah.
think that we've seen so many times listings where if you fix the main image, right? It's a conversion funnel, right? Ads are a conversion funnel, but honestly, organic is a conversion funnel, right? Like
Yep.
the search results are just a conversion funnel. So if you have a poor converting main image and title and secondary, but title matters too. But if that isn't converting well, your ads aren't going to convert well. And when you improve the conversion of what you put out there organically, your ads will perform better, your organic traffic will be better, and your conversion rate will be better on your like once people actually go to your listing.
Well, and your PPC comes down, like because
Totally.
the better conversion that you have, the less, Amazon doesn't have to charge you as high of a click through to make so much out of you, because
Exactly.
they want to make it on the sale too. So it's like, there's such a flywheel. Like we talk about the flywheels all the time on Amazon. Like anytime you got an algorithm that you're working with, there's flywheels involved, and sometimes you tweak one thing, pull one lever, and the flywheel spins 3 times faster.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's not only conversion either. I mean, I love conversion rate as much as anybody, but I think the other number that people need to keep in mind too here is, your click-through rate, especially when you're talking about ads, because Amazon Amazon is optimizing to make money in every step of that process. And so if they can show an ad to a customer and maybe you're bidding $1, but somebody else is bidding 90 cents, but they know that other product is much more likely to get a click and to convert, they're
Yep.
going to show that ad and they're going to show that product a lot more often. So, if you understand it from Amazon's perspective of they're trying to optimize every step of that process to make as much money as possible, then it gives you, I think, a little bit better alignment with what Amazon wants, in addition to your customers, in order to be successful in
Right.
moving your products forward.
I've got one tip on I think for the product display pages for improving some conversion rates. We have this poll we call the listing audit, which is basically sending potential customers to your Amazon listing to review it and then surface questions. It's kind of like a quality control thing that I mentioned earlier, right? So if you run a quick poll, send 30 people and just put in your Amazon listing and say, after reviewing this Amazon listing, what questions do you have? I promise you're going to get eye-popping responses. And there's going to be like 3 things that you're going to want to go into your Amazon listing to tweak just to make sure that those bases are covered, because the questions that our panelists have about your product after taking a look at it are going to be the same questions that a potential shopper are going to have.
Can I ask you, John? This is one of the things that has always, I don't want to say perplexed me, but makes me wonder a little bit sometimes. So with a service like PickFu, you're putting your images or your questions or whatever it is in front of this potential audience, and I believe you do have certain availability in terms of targeting the right audience. But if you're like say, so we sell my brand is ProTub Products, and we sell pool cleaning tools. And one of the interesting things about pool cleaning tools, and of course there's other products that are like that, but it's a very specific audience, right? I mean, like there's 300 million people in the US, but there's only 10 million pools in the US, So I'm selling to a much smaller subset of a much larger group of individuals. And then of course, I'm selling to an even smaller subset because I'm targeting a very specific pool owner, right? So on PickFu, or even some other platform that maybe does something similar, how granular can you get with that, or how granular should you get with that testing to try and make sure you're getting the right answer? Because I've always looked at it and said, if I'm testing with too generic of an audience, then I'm not necessarily so sure that the answers I'm getting back are the answers that my target customers would give me. So what's your response on that?
Sure. So with PickFu, we're able to provide over 90 different targeting traits. So Mike, in your case specifically, we do have a segmentation of homeowners versus renters and so on. So that can get you a little bit closer. I do not know off the top of my head whether we can target pool owners. on PickFu, but we do have the ability to build custom audiences. We could dig into that for you if that was, but we have built custom audiences in the past. I think a combination of homeowners plus maybe the demographics of your target buyer might get you a pretty close approximation. Obviously, go ahead.
Do you guys have an option for targeting geographically at all?
Yeah, I believe 5 or 6 different geos in the US. Yes.
Okay. Because that potentially, like the one thing that I did determine is, I mean, if you think about it, if I live in someplace really warm and
Yeah.
I have a lot of money, I have a pool.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to live someplace hot and have that kind of money and not have a
Yep.
pool. So, that for us is actually a fairly simple identifier of our target. And I would argue, like, and I've said this to other sellers, that, if you're having trouble targeting, sometimes thinking outside the box like that, and say, okay, I can't on this platform, I can't choose pool owner, but
Yeah.
I can choose, somebody in Florida who has this much money.
Right.
It's an 80% chance he probably has a pool, right?
Yeah, you can probably
Maybe
so on
for your
PickFu,
product is the same way.
Yeah, you can probably target homeowner, income over $100,000, and in the Southwest or Southeast or something, right?
Right.
Like, you might get pretty close.
Sure.
Yep.
So kind of working off that, optimization piece of it, and you gave a great tip there. How do you, or what recommendations would you have for listeners that are like, okay, I'm familiar with Amazon Manage My Experiments. How can I, and I think for me, I don't think about it as, using one or the other. It's really, a combination of both. What recommendations would you have for listeners out there as far as how to leverage those two together in order to, really improve their listings?
Absolutely. I think Manager Experiments is a fantastic tool, and I think the best sellers use both PickFu in conjunction with Manager Experiments. So I think with PickFu, what you can do is you do your rapid iterations on PickFu as you're working with your designer for your for different collateral, different offers, and so on. You test those. You would do those reps on PickFu to make sure that you have the absolute optimized variation of what your team is producing. Then you can go put that into Manager Experiments once you have more confidence, and then you can go validate that on Manager Experiments. I have heard anecdotally that Manager Experiments may or may not necessarily work all the time, right? But at least you can use PickFu to get that quick feedback to understand, iterate your way to a better final product before you actually, or a better final option before actually putting that out onto Manager Experiments.
How would you recommend to sellers who are thinking of using a service like PickFu in terms of, if we get into procedurally, how you might walk through it? Let's get specific and just talk main image, let's say.
Sure.
So we're talking about that idea of using PickFu on the front end for rapid iteration, and then maybe we confirm our results with our Manager Experiments and see how we go. So if we're using PickFu and we want to do this rapid iteration, how large, what's the best way to say this, so that we can get the results that we need as quickly as possible, but with the least amount of expense as possible? Yep. What size audience would you recommend that somebody actually use? Because obviously you can tell, a person can choose on PickFu, I want 50 people or I want 500 people. If I'm going to run iterations like that, what's the sweet spot?
30 to 50 people, many iterations. That's your sweet spot. As when you're in the iteration process, you want to make it fast, and you want, and in our study, from what we've seen, 30 to 50 is a pretty good, what you want is directional significance, right? You don't want absolute statistical significance. We can get into like a whole debate about like what that actually means, and right. But 30 to 50 people will get you directional significance. And it's not just about the numbers, but it's also about the insights that you and your team and your designer are pulling from the responses that help guide you to the next iteration of what it is that you're building. So in terms of getting really tactical, if you were to say that, okay, well, I have this listing, it's not performing well, and I would like to take a swing at optimizing this main image, what I would recommend is that first, you run a competitive test with your image against the category bestsellers. Read the responses, understand what are the pros of the category leaders compared to your image, go to your designer, work with them to figure out an image that incorporates some of those other additional benefits, eye candy, whatever it is that are eye catching on the top sellers. Then work with that image and keep iterating on that image over and over and over again until you have a new image that is competitive. Then now you have an image that is that you feel is confident, that you are confident that is competitive to the category bestsellers. Then you take that image, you can go ahead and pop that into manager experiments, or a lot of our users, they'll just swap the image, and they'll usually see increases of like 15% increases in click-through rate.
Right.
Well, and I want to double click on what you just said there, because to me, that's one of the things that's kind of my axe to grind with Manage My Experiments. So it's great to see conversion rates and some of the other data that they give you. But what they don't give you is your CTR. So they don't tell you what your click-through rate is. Well, if you have an image that actually, has a little bit better conversion rate, but has a much lower click-through rate, well, you've actually done more harm than good in that process.
Yes.
So how does that, if we're running a PickFu experiment, how can we pull out or basically test for that CTR component?
So I think it's hard to test for the CTR component. What I will say anecdotally is that, like generally PickFu polls are can be a pretty good proxy for a better performing main image on the Amazon search results. The heuristic that I've seen working with a lot of the aggregators who use PickFu is that they will keep, when they are doing their own image variation, like improving their main image and taking the original image and comparing it to these new variations that their designers are creating, they want to win, I think it's 70-30, that the new image beats the old image by 70-30. Mm-hmm. And that gives them confidence to just go put that up there, and they will see better results on Amazon.
Right. Okay. And how, because I think the other piece that you pointed out is the time component. So if I'm running a PickFu poll, what does the timeline generally look like for getting those results back?
50 responses in 30 minutes.
Yeah. So that's so much faster than, if you look at Manage My Experiments, best case scenario, if you have a ton of traffic, you can get results back in a couple of weeks. Worst case scenario, if you have, a product that maybe barely qualifies, or even if it, assuming it does qualify for Manage My Experiments, it can take, a month to 6 weeks in order to get those results back that are significant enough to make a decision of, hey, did this new image or any other components of your listing move the needle? And so I think going back to like what you said, being able to iterate very quickly is a big advantage.
I think a component of that too that strikes me is that if you're going to use PickFu, then I think set up your process in such a way that it makes the greatest use of what appears to be one of the greatest assets that PickFu has to offer, which is that quick iteration, right? Like if I can get results back in 30 minutes, but I can't get a new design to test for 3 days, well, then I've lost a lot of the benefit of using PickFu. Yes, it still benefits me because I'm still going to take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, through Manage My Experiments. But I could, if I had a designer ready, okay, I've set this project up. We're going to iterate this. As soon as we get a result, I want you to take that new image and I want you to just keep iterating on that. I'm going to connect you to the PickFu account and just keep rolling this through. In a day, you could run all of those experiments and be where you need to be and have that finalized image ready to go, rather than 3 weeks from now having that, because it takes you 3 days to reiterate again. So I would suggest, if you're listening to this and you're considering PickFu, make the best use out of that speed of iteration by having the back end process already set up with a designer and maybe your brand manager who are just right on that, to keep moving through that.
And that's a really good point. And that's how we see a lot of our power users using it, is that when it's time for a new design, it comes really rapidly, because we know that it's the brand manager and the designer sitting on the other side who are making iterations, running a poll. going out for coffee, coming back, taking a look at the results, iterating again, and running another poll. And so you can get so much done in a day like that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that we've struggled with as a brand is speed, in terms of making those adjustments and doing that testing. And I would say to our detriment, we haven't made effective use. We've utilized PickFu on occasion. I mean, we have used the service, but we haven't used it to the fullest extent that we could. And we certainly haven't iterated like that with that speed. To be honest, as much as I knew, like in my head, I knew that, okay, yeah, you could iterate faster with PickFu. It didn't really occur to me until just a moment ago, just how quickly you could really iterate from start to finish and have a really good performing, image done, in a day.
Yep. You're not the only one. Don't worry. Don't feel bad.
Well, and even has my wheels turning as far as, thinking about maybe you have, because I feel like there's always these discussions of like, kind of back to what you were talking about earlier, where John, where you're like, okay, we have some creative discussions about, well, I think this image is going to be best, and you think that image is going to be best, and somebody else thinks that this image is going to be best. And so having, even if you had those different iterations of the image to say, okay, here's the top 3 iterations of this image that we have, and we can spend, we can get the results back on all 3 of those images within 3 days, or within 30 minutes each. So an hour and a half to know exactly which image is going to be best. And then it gives us, like you said, kind of that directional nudge to say, hey, here's the direction that we go in.
Yeah. Just PickFu it, right? As we say internally, like we can debate about it, or you can just PickFu it, and like
stop debating and just PickFu it, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, it's fun to joke about, but like it's not. This is like PickFu is not the answer, right? PickFu is just information, right? It's ultimately up to you to make that decision. But obviously, if you want to be data driven, then it helps to have that information to give you that confidence about like a go no go decision or an A or B or whatever.
Yeah. It's also interesting. I think that it's likely that a lot of individuals who might consider using a service like PickFu would maybe bristle a little bit at taking the time to actually dig into the text-based responses. Like I think to their detriment, I think a lot of sellers would likely take the short run at that and instead run tests that they believe they can just simply use the numbers and make that determination and ignore the text when you're missing probably 75% of the value of the test if you're not reading through the text. Because again, like you said, you may run across a theme in there that, somebody's mentioning something that the numbers don't necessarily bear it out. But if you address that issue in your next image, you might find a very significant change in the result.
Exactly. Like losing numerically doesn't mean you've lost. It just means that there's opportunity to uncover on in those comments for you to improve.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to roll back to this, just listing optimization in general, because I think that that's a huge opportunity that's missed by sellers. Because, if you think about increasing, your conversion rate or your click-through rate by, let's say right now you're at 10%, and then you're able to increase that to 12%. That 2% doesn't seem like a whole lot, but if you're selling that product over the course of, 6 months to a year, and you think about not only how many additional sales you got from that, but we all know, Mike, like you talked about the Amazon flywheel, like, okay, how much more visibility do I get? How much more does that decrease my ad costs and all the other compounded effects that can have a huge impact on your listing just by increasing it, that extra, 2% for your conversion rate.
So, John, if you were to express the one thing that is, what's the best way to say it? The one mistake that most individuals make when they come in and start using PickFu, what is the thing that most everybody is doing wrong?
Not iterating, I would say, is the biggest thing. That is where the opportunity is. I think they come in, they run one poll. They think that that is the be all end all of either optimization or, Mike, like you said, they look at the numbers and they're either discouraged or they feel like that's enough.
Right.
And then they stop iterating. And so they're coming to PickFu for an answer rather than for insight. And it's if you come to PickFu for insight, that gives you ideas and opportunities for even more improvement.
I like that. Insights, not answers.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that is a phenomenal tip for listeners. You gave one earlier about, just run your listings. You'll be surprised at the feedback that you'll get from people in gaps that you have that you never even thought about.
Yeah.
Is there any other kind of, action tips that you would have, kind of that one thing that listeners should definitely do in order to move their brand forward?
Yeah. I would say take one other one that would be really insightful is to run a competitive test with your main image against your category bestsellers. And I would promise you that you're going to get a ton of insight. And don't feel bad if you lose. It's okay, because just read the comments, and I promise you, you're going to get a lot of ideas for improvement.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, like you said, you've given us some really good ideas here today on, how we can iterate quickly and get those insights. John, for people that want to learn more about you and more about PickFu, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah. I mean, PickFu is a self-service website. Just go to pickfu.com, pickfu.com. For me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach me, John at PickFu.
Perfect. Well, John,
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.